I think we can kind of go ahead and get started. We are starting to see people fill into the room. So thanks so much for logging on and joining us. I see a lot of friends on here. I see some of the partners we've worked with, a couple of our customers. Hello, hello. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Before we kind of dive into the conversation today, just a couple quick items to cover for everybody. We're going to have a few housekeeping notes and general information to cover in the beginning. I'm going to introduce our amazing speakers who've really cleared time out of their busy schedules to join us today. And then we're going to review our discussion point for today's conversation and really kind of take it from there. But wanted to kind of let you know, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen today after those discussion points, because I really want to bring the full attention to our panelists. So you don't have to worry about any kind of in-depth PowerPoint to follow along with today. So at the end, I will share a screen kind of one more time to bring it up. There's actually going to be QR codes to LinkedIn pages. So I recommend having your cell phones handy if you have a kind of a QR code reader. I definitely suggest a follow to our speakers, stay in the know of all things interesting and relevant on the topics that they're talking about today. So we'll kind of start with some overall housekeeping notes. First, we are recording this session. So, feel free to take as many notes as you like, but know that you will get a copy of this recording tomorrow in the email you registered with. We're also going to try and save time at the end for a Q&A. So if you kind of take a moment and look at the bottom of the screen, you should find a Q&A feature. So if you have any questions as we go along, please drop them. And I hope to have time reserved where we can kind of get to a few of these questions from the audience. You can add questions anytime kind of throughout our discussion. So feel free to kind of drop those in. To kind of get started, for those of you joining the call who may not be too familiar with PracticePanther, I thought I'd get just a quick overview. We're an all-in-one legal practice management solution that's really focused on helping those small to medium-sized law firms really across all practice areas. We want to be easy to use for our customers. And so we really strive to be really the most intuitive software on the market. Lawyers are using practice management software every day to make their life easier. It should be pretty to look at. It should be easy to use. And one way we do that really is through customization, the ability to customize the needs really depending upon your practice area. So some of these features are seamless case management that allow you to link your contacts and matters and documents, whether that's in the office or on the go. You can automate your workflows, get those tasks completed, know when they have to be completed. We offer native e-signature and two-way texting to keep your clients engaged. And then you can even go digital with your billing and payments, which, studies are showing that law firms are getting paid faster and they're collecting more when they're really incorporating these digital payments. So we want to make it easy for all of our customers to have access to that option. So let's go ahead and get into the good stuff. And let's meet some of the people who's going to be really answering these important questions today. Want to share a little bit of background on everyone before we jump in. A little bit about me. I lead strategic partnerships here at PracticePanther. That ultimately means I get the privilege of collaborating with state and local bars, with legal consultants, practitioners, and even some customers to find ways to really support and empower law firms on how they can efficiently and effectively manage their firms. So I joined PracticePanther with about 15 years of experience in marketing and partnerships and sales, which really kind of helps me turn those strategic challenges into untapped opportunities. Joining me today, we have Marie Burgess, Jim Calloway, and Carolyn Elephant. And so let's start with Marie. Marie Burgess is our VP of Product, who boasts over 20 years of experience in legal technology. With her extensive background, Marie helps law firms of all sizes by really bridging the gap between their technology advancements and really their efficient, effective operations. So as VP of Product, Marie plays a crucial role in shaping the development of the PracticePanther software and to ensure we really address two important areas, that customer input and feedback, as well as what's happening with industry needs. Thanks so much for joining us today, Marie. And then we have Jim, and I actually had the pleasure of working with Jim Calloway, both digitally and in person, which I can't say really about everybody anymore these days. He holds a significant role as the Director of Management Assistant Program at the Oklahoma Bar Association. PracticePanther actually had the pleasure of attending an Oklahoma Bar, the Solo and Small Firm Conference, where Jim's extensive network was immediately evident. Also, you've never been down to an OBA event, they know how to throw a fun party. We got to dress up, Great Gatsby. It was a great evening, ton of fun. So appreciate that. And not only is Jim a great connector, he's also a legal thought leader. He's dedicated to helping lawyers really organize and enhance the business and the management side of their practice through his director role at the OBA. He shares even additional insights through his blog called Law Practice Tips, and he's a seasoned podcaster hosting a monthly show called The Digital Edge, Lawyers and Technology. Thanks for joining us today, Jim.
Thank you.
And then last, but definitely not least, we have Carolyn Elephant. At PracticePanther, I've had the privilege of collaborating with individuals really dedicated to empowering and supporting lawyers and law firm owners. So one person who I think exemplifies this in a major way is Carolyn Elephant. Much like Jim, Carolyn stays busy in the legal industry. She literally wears all the hats. She operates her own law firm, the law offices of Carolyn Elephant, specializing in energy and eminent domain cases. She's the driving force behind myshingle.com, which is the longest running blog dedicated to solo and small firm practices. And through her platform, she has helped countless lawyers successfully launch their own firms. I highly recommend taking a look, bookmarking it when we wrap here today. Her active presence really extends to speaking engagements, to podcast appearances, and to her pioneering work actually in AI through her AI Accelerator course, which really demonstrates her commitment to advancing that legal technology and helping lawyers reach their full potential. So thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so let's kind of get into the discussion real quick, and then I promise I get to wrap what I'm talking about, and we'll actually get to this really great conversation. So for today's discussion, we're going to really begin by setting the stage on what AI is within the legal industry. AI is a broad and constantly evolving field, and different people may have varying levels of familiarity with it, its applications, and its implications in legal. It'll be important for us to kind of all get on the same page on, what really is generative AI within legal. We'll discuss some overall reactions and attitudes within the legal community as more people begin to consider this AI adoption. We'll get into use cases. We'll talk about some of those tangible benefits as well as, those potential risks that people are talking about and what's associated with utilizing generative AI. We'll touch on those terms and conditions, what you need to know about what you are agreeing to when you use it. We're going to talk briefly about disclosing that AI usage. And then all of our speakers have agreed to look into their legal industry crystal ball to kind of help us predict what might occur in the future and how generative AI may continue to shape the legal landscape really for years to come. So this is kind of really where I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And get back to the crew. And so let's start with what is AI within legal. And I really wanted to start with the basics here. Everyone has seen really some level of news, social feed about AI. You might be called out for living under a rock if you didn't know about the emergence of AI really across all industries, but specifically in legal, it is all the rage. So I wanted to begin with the general opening question. I want to throw this out to Marie. Marie is a 20-year veteran, 20-year technology veteran at that, with tons of experience in legal. I wanted to hear from you on how you define AI for those on the call who either may not know much about it or they've heard it, they're not too familiar with it. I thought you could maybe give us a bit of context on what generative AI is and why it's causing so much buzz.
Sure. Thanks, Libby. I'm excited to be participating in this panel today with Jim and Carolyn. And I'll start with a high-level overview of AI and generative AI. AI, or artificial intelligence, really has been around for many, many years. And there's lots of examples in your everyday life of where you see and use that. And it primarily uses data and evaluates and analyzes data and to predict certain outcomes. So examples that that are pretty basic that you would be familiar with are, autocorrect features when you're text messaging on your mobile phone, facial recognition, self-driving cars are examples of AI. And all the rage and all the buzz for the last 10 months or so, as Libby said, is around generative AI, which kind of takes AI or traditional AI a step further in that it actually creates content. So it creates data, text, images, it can create music even. And it uses algorithms that are powered by these machine learning models, essentially models that have been pre-trained on large volumes of data, whether that's coming in from the internet or other sources. But these models get pre-trained, and you might have heard of like large language models or LLMs. So they get pre-trained on this data so that they can actually generate content. And as Libby said, you may have been living under a rock if you haven't heard about ChatGPT at some point in time over the last almost year or so. But that's an example of a generative AI tool or algorithm. But there's lots of other ones. There's Bing Chat, Google Bard. There's Microsoft Copilot. Like there's a bunch out there now. And if we talk about ChatGPT, because that's had the most amount of buzz, it's an interactive chatbot that provides answers to pretty much any question that you ask it. And the output mimics like a human. So it mimics human generated content. And I've used it extensively in my personal life, in my professional life. And it's honestly pretty amazing and what the data that it actually comes back with. Like I've used it to generate a recipe based on some ingredients I had, a travel itinerary. I used it for, I got a draft of a cover letter for a job that my son was applying to. So it puts like this really good starting point for a lot of different topics. Professionally, drafting an email, like some correspondence on an email. I've used it even to, work with my team, like brainstorm on some virtual team building exercises. But it's all about how you ask the questions, right? Like the more context you can give these chatbots, the more relevant that the information you'll get back. So I might say, look, I'm a lawyer. I work in this type of practice in this jurisdiction, and then the information you get back will be more relevant. So it's just using it and kind of understanding how these prompts can actually change the way that the data is retrieved. But overall, there's overwhelming consensus that this is and will be transformative for the legal industry and the way the law firms practice law. There's been much activity over the course of the last 10 months around legal technology vendors releasing new products and new features around utilizing generative AI, but also being focused on automation. How do these tools help make law firms more efficient, more productive? How do we save them time with these tool sets? And so we've seen, a number of use cases, and we're going to talk about them more, I think, in the panel, but contract review and analysis, document automation and generation, legal research. And that's probably another area where it's also most newsworthy, is that the generative AI algorithms like ChatGPT have been known to have a level of bias based on the data that they're using to train them. So there's, it kind of comes in with this bias, and as a result, some of the responses that you'll get from ChatGPT and other generative AIs will be false. Yeah, you'll hear this term hallucinations, where ChatGPT and other tools are basically, they make up data. It's inaccurate data. And earlier this year, some of you may have heard there was a lawyer that cited some references to responses from ChatGPT during his legal research, and that made its way into the courts, only to find out that the information that was included was fictitious. Unfortunately, there wasn't, that lawyer didn't go and validate that information or verify it, which is something that needs to be, we need to use some caution, right? That information may be false coming back. So validating it and making sure that is accurate and you're using it going forward. The other thing just to note kind of when you're using these tools is it is now public information, right? Like you're submitting the questions you're asking it. You just need to be aware of what you're feeding in to those tools. But overall, I mean, I think it's amazing. I think there's a ton of opportunity and the technology is moving rapidly in this area.
Awesome. And I think that just really shows like the span of all the different ways that you can kind of utilize it, all the different iterations of AI. And I even appreciate, talking about how you have utilized it even. So I think that's helpful. It brings people up to speed. So want to kind of pivot over to you, Jim. I have a couple questions. As a practice management advisor, really on the brink of helping your bar association members really navigate and use new technology within their practices, we'd love to know kind of what are you hearing from your members on their overall understanding of AI? Do you get the feeling, are they super excited about it, pretty pumped? Are they showing some fear, maybe some hesitation about how to move forward? And then a kind of a follow-up question, or what are some of the ways maybe they're utilizing it or incorporating it at their law firms?
Well, I would say there were a lot of reactions, not just from our members, but on the internet. And the first reaction was, "Oh my God, is this going to take lawyers' jobs?" Which was unsurprising. And I think truly the answer is yes, not in the way that we think or not immediately. But if you're an associate who your entire job is summarizing depositions and summarizing briefs and whatever, the AI is going to do a lot of that, and it's going to probably do it better. And I think that's one of the things we don't like to hear. Marie, I'd want to note that my son also we created his job application letters with AI, and he got a job, so we're excited. But in November 2022, this was released, and it was trained back to data September 2021. That's kind of the first release, and to go to kind of a low level thing, since Marie said she was high level. Kenton Bryce, who's the director of the law library at University of Oklahoma College of Law and was on the tech show board this year, said it's really like Mad Libs. Have you ever seen that game where the people have magnets on their refrigerator where you just take random words and make sentences out of it? Says that's what AI is doing. It's just filling in these sentences with what looks like to be the majority view. The difference is these machines don't really understand what they're saying. And it's hard to deal with that, but they don't know what they're saying. There's kind of two prongs to that. Number one, they don't know what they're saying, so there's going to be mistakes and hallucinations. Number two, when they do know what they're saying, it's going to be even more scary, right? When they really internalize and understand this. So I've talked to a lot of lawyers. They're mainly getting their toes dipped in, with free services and Google Bard and some of those others, but everybody's interested. But the challenge is just what Marie said. We need more automation in all law firms, but especially solo and small firm law firms, where if you don't have practice management software, if you don't have these good AI tools, if you don't have things, then the lawyer ends up either doing it themselves or taking the one staff person and dedicating them to doing it. So I think these are really going to help. I'm amazed that it can write code, probably just because I can't, but I'm amazed that it can write code. And so I think we're going to see quite a few changes. I wouldn't want to say one thing, Marie, just because it's really important for lawyers. It's true that we're sharing this out when we make prompts and queries, but OpenAI has now announced that you can go in and check a box where your queries won't be used to train AI in the future. And so I think lawyers are all going to want to do that just out of an abundance of caution. So anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, I love that. And the fact that it can write code. I mean, you're so right. I was talking with a practitioner the other day who can utilize it and, develop entire PowerPoints with ChatGPT. And, it was just really interesting to watch her work. So, and Carolyn, kind of this next question is for you. I get to partner, as I mentioned, with a lot of practitioners, and you're one of the first lawyers I saw really openly talk about AI and the use of it at your firm. So as I mentioned in your intro, not only are you running your own firm, you're also a consulting lawyer, really training other lawyers in many areas, including how to incorporate AI. So for you, as one of the first lawyers I saw talking about it and really ways to consider implementing it, can you tell us how you went about determining the best ways to implement it at your firm, and what are the ways that you're currently using it now? Maybe you can think about it as lessons learned, and how are those lessons informing the decisions you make and the law firms that you consult with make today?
So there's a couple of questions there. I guess the first thing that I did is I made a determination between the more commercial tools designed for lawyers versus the freely available ones. And both have their own uses and roles, and I treat them as such. So just as I wouldn't use Google to do research for a DC Circuit brief, I wouldn't necessarily use ChatGPT for really hardcore legal research the way that the attorney did who ran afoul of the court's rules. And of course I would read the cases. So for real serious legal work, I use some of the commercial tools like Case Text's Copilot. And I think that's the main one. I've also looked at Spellbook, which does contract analysis. And for everything else, for marketing, for sort of lay of the land, understanding of issues, for cleaning up writing, all of those other things, I'll use something like ChatGPT or some of the more general applications. And I think that's a good breakdown. And I think that's a good way to think about these tools because lawyers already have a reference point for it. Lawyers are accustomed to using Wikipedia for background information. They're accustomed to using Google for background information. But I think few lawyers would, while they might cite those sources in their brief, they would be as supporting information, not as sort of the main part of it. And so I find those tools useful for that. I also find the tools to be useful, the non-lawyer tools to be useful to empower my staff. So maybe I don't want to take the time to create a PowerPoint using ChatGPT or create an outline, but I can have my assistant run some searches or put some content together using it. If I were to have associates working for me or contract attorneys, I can have them run some of the searches to kind of do an oversight on some of these different tools. But I find that I just think it's important to sort of just be open to them and to think of ways that you can use them and just engage in a lot of experimentation too. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But I found them really very helpful for producing content, for summarizing content. One way that I found very useful, I've always tried to look for ways to make technology help me be more accessible to clients. And one amazing way that I found to use it is to when I'm having meetings with clients virtually, to have the meetings recorded and transcribed using AI. And then you have a record of your conversation with your client. You have everything that they said, because usually when clients come in, the initial meetings are not always very orderly. It's hard to take notes on everything and be responsive to the client. So this kind of takes the pressure off. You've got somebody taking notes, transcribing them. And then when you go to start writing up either your engagement agreement or your course of action, you don't have to call the client back or email them 1,000 times and say, what did you say? You already have a record of it. They have a record of the information too. So I found that to be a use that's very time saving. And that's something that I really wasn't able to do before. So there's just, like I said, a range of uses from research to marketing. And I think for things like automation, I mean, I think right now we're at a point where AI and automation are still somewhat separate. I think we need to, I think looking to the future, I'd be looking at practice management tools or other legal tools that incorporate the AI so that the automation happens itself. Today, I was just experimenting with ChatGPT and I gave it a form with blanks in it. And I said, client's name is John and the person writing the letter is the firm, fill in these blanks. And it went in and it did that. So I think with automation now, lawyers still have to sort of manually mark up and code different fields in order to generate the automation. And I think we will get to a point where AI is able to do that very seamlessly. But right now, I still feel like they're two separate operations. And I agree with both Marie and Jim that automation is something that's vital to a law firm. And if you can make the automation easier to employ and to do it more accurately, I think more lawyers will adapt to it.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. And I even wrote down, I love how you mentioned how you're more accessible to clients. It kind of in some ways can act even as an assistant. So I think there's some really unique ways that lawyers could glean from how they could utilize AI today. And a quick question kind of for all three of you. If you could take just one area where you would say law firms really need to seriously think about leveraging AI starting, let's say tomorrow, what would that one area be? And we'll start kind of this with Marie.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing they could, like, someone wanted to get started on it tomorrow and, actually start trialing it and kind of dipping their toe in it would be around like document generation, like document or template creation, and even summarization. Like, I think ChatGPT and other generative tools does a really good job at creating sort of that initial draft, that first version or starting point on a document that you can then tweak and tailor and kind of make it your own. But whether it's a demand letter or a legal brief, or show me what like a standard commercial lease agreement would look like, or a privacy policy or NDA or something like that, it does a really good job of creating that initial version. I mean, certainly you need to know what would be expected in that content because you want to validate it. But I think it just accelerates that process of you getting to the point that you have that version that you'll use going forward. It can, create a outline for a deposition that you're going to, like, again, creating a starting point. Or if I'm a new lawyer and I want to start like publishing a website, you can, feed it in, hey, I'm an immigration lawyer in Arizona, like draft me an initial blog post. Like, you can get all of that really great content and just start trialing that like tomorrow. That could be something you start utilizing. And then Carolyn mentioned this as well, but I think this is a really big win around, summarizing documents. Even for this panel, I had this large article that I just sort of, fed into ChatGPT, and it spit me out like three small paragraphs to summarize it. And it was just a huge time saver if you think of documents that might take hours to summarize, and now it's in a matter of minutes. Again, you need to validate it, but it does, really accelerate that process and saves a bunch of time throughout that. So I think that is something that you could take advantage of immediately.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I agree that not starting with a blank slate for me sometimes, it's at least as a starting point. Jim, how about you? What's that one use case?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, if you haven't got your base documents automated, that's really your first project. If you're going to every document and doing copy and paste and edit and all that, that's your first project. But I think really I'd have to concur with Marie that marketing copy and blog posts and whatever is really the best thing. Because unless you can't spot an egregious ethics violation in the copy, it's going to write it more for an audience of people than an audience of lawyers. And so it's going to work very well for you in that regard. And I think that's a great thing to do. And again, there's limited risk. And we'll talk about risk in a second. But I think, document assembly from your template to your initial, dissolution petition or whatever it might be, that's pretty simple. But again, somebody mentioned Spellbook. The idea that Spellbook has incorporated millions of contracts, mainly big, expensive contracts, not necessarily the type that I drafted when I was in practice. And then you say, I want to do this in my contract, and it gives you like 10 choices of other contracts that have said that in a different way, and say, okay, I'll pick number 3. So I think that's going to be a really interesting thing about AI, to have that ability to not just reuse your work, but reuse other people's work, if you will.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought about that. Yeah, I'd like number 3, please. Carolyn, I'd love to kind of wrap this with you, and what are your thoughts on that one leveraging AI for that one thing?
Yeah. So I think it's going to depend on your practice area. If you have a high volume practice of more routine matters, then I would agree with Jim that getting your document automation in place and creating marketing copy and blog posts is really important. I think if you're in maybe a less volume practice, but one that changes very rapidly, the way copyright law and trademarks are changing really quickly now, or my practice area energy, I think what it allows you to do is stay on top of the changes in the law and go to the original source material. So usually you're reliant on the trade press to report the news, and sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not, and sometimes it misses out on important points. But you can just have it just hoover through these cases. It'll chop them up and spin them out. You don't even need something like Kate's Text Copilot to do that. You can do that either with ChatGPT, or I've found Anthropic's Claude really useful for anything, a PDF up to 75,000 words. It'll even put a case together, like using the IRAC approach that you use in law school. just pick out all the high points and just does it so quickly. So you can kind of glance at that, and then it gives you an index of whether you need to go back to the case and look at it more closely, or puts you right on top of the changes. Because as technology advances, we see the law is also, it necessitates change in the law in so many ways. So if you're in a practice area that's subject to those changes, it's really the only practical way to stay up to date.
Catherine, you said, I'm sorry, Caroline, you said co-pilot, you meant co-counsel, right?
Yes, co-counsel.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry, thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And I think these are all, really great insights from each of you, in ways that I think small ways even lawyers could start tomorrow, even if they haven't even logged into a Claude or a Chat GPT yet, maybe they're too nervous, just get started, it's super easy to do that. So, and so far we've talked about kind of use cases as well as, opportunities for law firms and the ways they should consider utilizing it. But I also want to be sure we're sharing kind of the full picture. And we've alluded to this in several of the other answers already, but there's really been a lot of discussion around this. And I want to start with Jim here. We talk about really some of the considerations from that risk standpoint when leveraging AI at your firm. One consideration is probably the most common, we brought it up a little bit before, are those hallucinations. And again, those are that confident response given by AI that is actually, made up of completely false information. It's just not based on any facts or any real data, but it's very plausible sounding. And the second risk is biased responses. A concern, since some experts are out there predicting that as much as 90% of the internet will be generated from AI content, in the next couple of years. So that's crazy to think about. So these potential risk considerations, have caused a number of companies, not even just specific to law, but they're banning the use of generative AI. Accenture, Apple's another one, Amazon. Some of these higher profile companies are specifically banning Chat GPT in the workplace. And so, Jim, as you think about it, what do you see as some of the biggest or maybe most common risks associated with firms kind of leveraging AI?
Well, he's been referenced earlier, but we have to mention New York lawyer Stephen Schwartz, who practiced for 30 years and then got into a terrible Chat GPT ethics mess. And I think really his problem was doubling down when he first got called on the brief was bad. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be all holy, but we never filed briefs citing cases we haven't read. It's just a rule. And so he had kind of the bad technology story replacing the lawyer who's not a cat on the internet now is the worst story we've had. But it also exposed that there were some things with his situation. So I think that's one risk. Clearly, I would, as we mentioned earlier, I do want to emphasize that I'd turn off, if the ability I can, the ability for my queries to be added into any database. But we're going to see a lot of external risks too. And I know that wasn't what you asked, but I want to just notice we're going to get a lot better spam coming in the next few years. You're going to have spam, these malware things that mention a person you were at a party with last night, and they introduced you and all this kind of stuff just because it went out on social media and grabbed all that stuff automatically. So we're going to see a lot of threats, but I think lawyers, mainly need to figure out how they're going to use it, and if they're going to use it, they probably want to invest in one of the more, we mentioned Copilot. Copilot's going to come out from Microsoft, and it's going to basically index all of your Outlook emails, your Word documents, your PowerPoint, whatever. I'd really like to have an AI that's trained on my stuff, right? That sounds kind of up the alley for me. So I think it's, if you have a practice management advisor like we have two in Oklahoma, calling them and asking them about it is a good plan. I've been writing a lot of articles on it that are both on my blog and LinkedIn. So when you get to that QR code, you can get some articles on LinkedIn. Carolyn's doing all training and all sorts of other things on it. But I think it's to be cautious and to be skeptical. I'd probably close this session with a quote from Ed Walters, who's the co-founder of Fastcase and teaches the law of robotics at Georgetown, who says, "The answers are often totally wrong, but they're all highly convincing." And that's kind of my problem with it. It's so confident, it's easy to get dragged in.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, I'm glad you kind of mentioned that kind of the checkbox of whether it can utilize your information moving forward. And I think it's kind of just taking a quick moment to really call out that feature, because I think that helps maybe mitigate a few of the risks, because otherwise, yeah, what is that risk from a legal perspective, that case or firm perspective, firm process perspective? Because we don't want all these companies to own then your product, so that's definitely something to consider. And is that something that's out now that they can check, Jim, or do you know if that's a feature coming out soon?
I think it's already available. I haven't gone to check the box yet, just because I don't really put anything I consider confidential in ChatGPT at this point. So it's fine for them to train on my queries. I anticipate doing it at some point, but I believe it's available now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's available now. Yeah.
Perfect. And Carolyn, would love to kind of hear from you as well, as someone who's kind of implementing it at your firm. What do you think about the risks associated or the terms and conditions piece when utilizing these AI tools?
So I don't think these AI tools are any different from social media that we saw before, or email that we saw before that. Lawyers always have to be careful when they're dealing with confidential information, but you do a risk analysis on the degree of confidentiality and the exposure that you would have if there's a risk. So whether I have a privacy box checked or not on ChatGPT, I'm not going to put a client's social security number into it, or even their name and their birthday. And the same is true even if I'm doing a recording. But would I ask a question on ChatGPT that I might ask in a Facebook group? Like, I've got a case where a client wants to file something and I don't want to do it. What's your advice? I mean, that's something I might post in a Facebook group. That's something I would post on ChatGPT. As Jim said too, you could have done this with hard copy books. When I went to law school, you could take a reporter site that you found in an article and cite the case and not read it, even though it was in the hard copy book. I mean, those kinds of mistakes happen. So I don't want to say that the risk is overblown, but I think if you're representing clients prudently and as an attorney, you're going to take those things into consideration, and you're naturally going to avoid any of the issues. I think a lot of it is, I think there's a lot of common sense involved in it too. The other thing is you can get information on on the resources these tools are trained on. I mean, as Jim said, for something like Spellbook, I mean, they'll tell you when you sign up for it, it's trained on big contracts. So if I'm using Spellbook to look at a regular person contract, like an influencer agreement or a landlord-tenant lease, I'm going to know it may not actually pick up on some of the issues that I need it to, because it's trained on big commercial contracts. So that's something I'm going to take into account when I'm doing my analysis, just as I would if I were doing research on, Maryland state law, and I could only access a federal court database. I would know that the results that it's coming back with are going to be imperfect or impartial or partial, because it doesn't include a state database too. So I think understanding what these tools have been trained on, and I think they're becoming more transparent about what they've been trained on. I think that's helpful to know. And the last thing is you just want to advise your staff and have some sort of policy in place. If you're asking staff to use AI, or if they're using it on their own, you may want to give them some guidance, telling them if you use AI to keep track of the prompts or keep a record of what you asked it, to avoid using confidential information in your prompts, and just give your staff guidance so that if they go off to use it, and they probably are going to do that, at least they have some instructions to follow.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, having a policy in place, because I think people are going to use it, whether it's at the office or at their home, people are curious, they're interested to know. And I think it's really great to put that policy in place. I think that's a kind of an excellent point to kind of end on, for that question. We have talked about, some of the risks, but I wanted to pivot, and Carolyn, kind of go back to you on this one. It's not necessarily really a risk, but it's more of a concern and a hotly debated topic right now, again, across all industries, not just legal, but that's the fear of being replaced. We kind of talked about it a little bit in the beginning as well. The robots are coming for us, right? So whether you're a paralegal, whether you're a lawyer, AI can do all these really interesting things. It can quickly review and summarize pages of research. We've talked about it, writing briefs, maybe contracts, building out workflows, and potentially getting into automation more, creating witty marketing copy. It can pass the bar exam, which we've seen. And it can even write a song about being a lawyer. It has all of these different talents, which is kind of just crazy interesting. But Carolyn, can you speak to your thoughts really on the benefits of AI and how we could see it maybe more from the flip side? How is generative AI enhancing the value and the counsel provided by law firms so that it amplifies the services versus kind of making them feeling either redundant or, heaven forbid, somebody's feeling replaced? What are some of those benefits? Let's take that flip side look.
Sure. So, and I do think, as Jim said, also, there are some positions or some work that will be replaced. I see it even now in my own practice. Previously, if I had to do like a very simple motion on the fly, I would maybe hire a freelance attorney to draft something with, sort of not a high end, it's not a really complicated issue, and the results would be kind of mediocre. And so now I can just generate something like that myself and sort of replace the need for a mediocre attorney. So I think what it does is, for some of the work that's more routine and you can use the AI, it allows you to focus on other aspects of the case. It also allows you to have more time to develop other issues and improve the quality of service that you're providing, because you get the routine stuff that was taking your time or taking somebody else's time out of the way, and it opens up doors to exploring other sorts of issues. I also think, it just, in terms of saving time and cost, there's so many costs in a case. If you lose a case and you need to appeal it, there's so many costs related to getting the record together, organizing documents, putting briefs together. And my hope is that this is really going to facilitate the ability of lawyers to be able to appeal a lot of cases and get settled resolution on legal issues that hasn't happened before. And that's something that'll be enhanced by the tools that we use, but ultimately it's going to be sort of the human power, the human brain that's going to identify those issues and bring them forward. Because when you can have AI transcribing the record, finding evidence to support your appeal, highlighting areas where maybe the judge was wrong, it just reduces the cost of bringing those appeals. And there's so many cases that get summarily dismissed that never see the light of day again. And, maybe they should. So I am really, that's the thing that makes me the most optimistic about this. I see the possibility and not the drawbacks, which is often my fatal flaw. So.
Yeah, and I think it's great. And kind of summarizing, I think, it can allow you to invest time in more productive spaces. I love that kind of perspective. Whether new practice areas, maybe you need better client engagement. I think that's a really great way to look at it on how it can kind of free up some of that time. So as more people are utilizing AI, people, lawyers, what are your thoughts on divulging the use of AI in law? And I wanted to kind of go to Marie and Jim on this one. Should it be required to kind of share with clients, co-counsel, opposing counsel, judges? What do you think when people need to know if AI is being used? What are your thoughts on that? We'll start with Marie.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm not sure that at this time, right? The technology is changing rapidly and evolving and maturing. So I don't know at this time that there needs to be a proactive announcement to lawyers' clients about their use of AI. However, I think there needs to be some level of transparency. So if they do ask the question to the lawyer, that the lawyer is able to explain what they're using, how they're using it, why they're using it, and then most importantly, what measures they're taking to make sure that they're maintaining confidentiality and security regarding the client data. So, I think that's the most important thing, and just being knowledgeable on it and understanding like these tools. And, like I think Carolyn mentioned, understanding a little bit more about the models and the data that they're using will just help with that type of conversation. So I think there's an expectation that you should be able to talk to it and explain it if you're asked. Some of the other roles, though, Libby, like judges and co-counsel, I think it depends on your jurisdiction. Because of the few cases earlier this year where there was some lawyers that got into a little bit of hot water. There's some states, I think, or jurisdictions that have implemented rules around that, like some judges that have implemented rules around getting signed affidavits from counsel regarding the fact that either they didn't use Gen AI for it, or if they did, they, you know, made sure they followed up with manual validation. So I think it just depends on where you are, and you need to know where you are. But I think this area is like will change. Like I think the technology is changing faster than people that are kind of managing rules and regulations around it. So I think you will be seeing some best practices and things come out of this like relatively soon.
Yeah, it sounds like transparency is the good thing to kind of focus in on there. So I definitely appreciate that. And Jim, I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that or additional thoughts.
Well, you know, if you say is AI coming for the lawyers, I tell you, it's coming for the radiologists. You know, they've already proved that it will do better than the doctors. And I was talking to a healthcare provider who says, I don't know how we're going to get people to specialize in this in a few years. So that's an interesting thing. I'd also note that I use ChatGPT on my phone a lot. So, you know, if you're, I gave the example in one of my papers, if you're suddenly stuck out of town, your plane's marooning you for a day with your family, you know, what are the 10 best family activities in this town, you know, or whatever. And I've been using it lately. I'm going to do a blog post on this, just like Microsoft Word formatting. You know, I ask it about, I got my indentations all messed up in this document. How do I fix them? And it literally started out with number one, you should have used styles in the first place. But number two, just clear the formatting. And then 4 other points. You know, it was perfect. I mean, literally an A+ paper, which I don't usually say with AI. So there's just a lot of different things that are coming on. If you represent an artist, and this artist tells you they've decided instead of using paint, they're going to start using AI to demonstrate all their to do all their work. You need to make sure to tell them that the copyright office is going to say you can't copyright that then. You know, and so even if you don't want to use AI in your firm of law at all, there's going to be a lot of changes in society that this is going to trigger.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And then kind of one quick thought on, in addition, kind of the rollout of social media, and Carolyn even mentioned it briefly earlier. You know, we're experiencing things decades later we didn't envision when Facebook or Twitter or X first launched. So the idea of being, you know, canceled for your views that are maybe from posts that are decades old, you know, people are losing careers and more from that kind of technology. So this is a tough question maybe for all 3 of you. Okay. It's time to get out that crystal ball and fill us in on that prediction of what the future holds. You know, when it comes to the long-term impact, you know, how do you think generative AI will reshape the legal landscape in the next 10 years? Or, you know, is there anything that we can learn from some of these other tech rollouts that we should really kind of consider? And Marie, we'll kind of start this with you again.
Sure. Yeah, and Libby, just to echo your thoughts. I mean, I think like it's what's happened like in the last 10 months, like the rapid changes, the constant like evolution of this technology, the fact that ChatGPT had 100 million users within a couple of months of being there just shows how quickly this is moving. And I think I agree with you, like this is probably going to be somewhat monumental, like how our personal lives and our professional lives within the legal industry will change as a result of generative AI. So I think it's going to look a lot different in 5 to 10 years. I think both in the lawyer's role, certainly, and then also within practice management solutions. We sort of alluded to this in some prior questions, but like I think having those solutions add a lot more automation in all aspects, and having generative AI be sort of at the base framework of all of those, so that the lawyer's role goes from like doing things, right, to basically reviewing things that have been like automated for them throughout the process. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. So like any sort of administrative tasks are going to be, you know, definitely to the wayside, and you're just be able to focus on true legal advice, right? Like looking at those little more complex scenarios, more strategic projects that you're involved in, or like you said, Libby, expanding your practice and taking on new clients or different practice areas. I think you'll see that in different roles in the organization. And I think Carolyn alluded to that as well. I do think too, like it's been sort of talked about for decades around kind of the whole death of the billable hour, right? And how, you know, hourly billing will go away. And I think this, you know, generative AI and what it's introducing for firms and the automation opportunities might be the, you know, that thing that actually, you know, makes this more of a reality. and making lawyers move towards more different, special or alternative fee arrangements and more value-based billing. I think this will be, I think, the thing that makes that happen.
It's really interesting, and I like that focusing on that true legal advice. I think that is probably very exciting for a lot of lawyers out there. So, Jim, I'd love to kind of go to you next. What are your thoughts? Future goals?
If you had the machines generating all the paperwork and the busy work, you have a lot more time to spend with your clients, even maybe non-billable time with your clients. So I think that's important. But I'll refer to known legal futurist Richard Susskind, who quoted probably the best known futurist, Ray Kurzweil, who says that the technology underlying the AI systems is now doubling every 3.5 months, which will mean in 6 years, that'll be a 300,000-fold increase in the technology. So seeing what it can do now, that's stunning. And I think we're going to need rules and regulations, but I don't think it's necessary to notify clients unless there's a risk that they're incurring. And then I think you need to notify clients. So use your AI in a way that is risk-free to your clients. And I don't know that it has to be disclosed up front, but I totally agree with Marie. Never lie to the client and don't try to hide the ball if you get asked about it.
Yeah. Very, very good points. And Carolyn, I'd love to kind of pivot over to you and see what your thoughts on that important crystal ball prediction.
So the technology is definitely there and it's advancing. Unfortunately, one of the chokeholds is quite honestly the courts and the legal system. We saw in COVID that finally this big wall came down where courts started having online appearances and remote appearances, and it saved clients a lot of money. It made life easier for many attorneys, and hopefully we don't go back. But we had the technology to have remote appearances a decade, well, even realistically 5 years before courts weren't doing it. So my fear is that, unless courts start adopting e-filing across every jurisdiction in every state, allowing for digital transcription of court hearings or putting the court hearings online so that lawyers can get access to that information and be able to analyze it, and to have courts also I guess just make these documents available in digital format, we're going to lose out on a whole big chunk of data that could help make the practice of law easier and more affordable and more expansive and not be able to do it. So that's my concern, is that we need to have courts get on board with this and change the infrastructure of how the courts work to make data more accessible to attorneys so that they can leverage these AI tools in all courts and not just federal courts. I think the other potential negative is just sometimes lawyers tend to go a little bit crazy. So like when the internet came out and when you first had Google search and SEO, people would go online, have a website. Now it can cost, like $30,000 to buy the keywords for mesothelioma or things like that. So I'm afraid we may have an influx for a while of consultants who are persuading lawyers to, generate 10 years of content using artificial intelligence tool, and all of a sudden we've got an internet covered with spam. So the reason that I'm hopeful here, though, is that I think a lot of lawyers will get on board with AI because of the research capability it has. And I think that using that as the can do may get them more involved in the marketing and other components that you can use it for, so that the field just doesn't go to pot with consultants coming in and persuading lawyers to just, outsource all this stuff to them, where you wind up with like a whole bunch of spam at the end. But overall, I do agree that it's going to change the profession. There'll be less time spent on a lot of grunt work and routine work. And again, some of that will depend on the courts and how many, documents and forms and unnecessary filings you can get rid of. But I think overall it'll be a positive benefit, and it may reduce the cost of legal services for many people who aren't able to access them now.
One of the court things that's interesting, Catherine, Caroline, I'm having trouble getting over my words, is we could have more cases diverted out of the court system too. We've seen British Columbia take half their small claims cases and get them resolved by online dispute resolution.
Exactly.
Those are some really interesting points, and I really appreciate everybody's kind of perspective and the background that you come from, and kind of where you're sharing from. And kind of as we wrap up this conversation, I wanted to kind of give each of you, a minute or two to really cover anything related to AI that maybe we haven't been able to touch on. As they do that, I know we just have about 5 minutes left. So I hope to get maybe to a few questions in the question box, but let's start with Marie. What are kind of your final thoughts or things you definitely want to make sure you impart on people before they head out?
Yeah, sure. I think like really just for those that are unfamiliar or that are just getting started, like really just take the time to invest and learn and understand some of the basics of generative AI and the models they're associated with. Kind of figure out how to effectively use these tools, like the questions, the prompts, and then understand how to safely use the capabilities when you're taking security, privacy, and accuracy into perspective. And then try it out. Just be cautious when you're trying it, like some of these initial use cases that we've all talked about. Like start out small, kind of do some experimentation, make sure you're validating information, remember bias and hallucinations, and then really don't ignore it, right? Like don't put the blinders on. Like it's here and it's changing and it's moving fast. So the best thing that you can do for your practice is to stay abreast of what's going on.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Jim, we'll kind of pass it over to you.
Well, you've got to pay attention. You've got to know who your trusted sources are, but everybody's going to look at this a little differently. I was showing a tool called Descript to the District Attorney's Council meeting, where you can basically take the ums and ers out of your pre-recorded audio, and with a little bit more work, your videos. And of course, I thought that was cool as a person does podcasting or whatever. They instantly jump to, it'll be soon they'll be using this to fake evidence, won't they? And so we're just going to have to kind of work through all of this and see what the tools are. But again, an affidavit saying you're using AI tools is going to be real problematic, because about 2 or 3 years from now, most of the tools you use will have some form of AI embedded, just the way Google searches are a lot. I can misspell words in Google now. I couldn't 10 years ago. You know what I mean? So.
Absolutely. And Carolyn, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just to echo the other two panelists, I think it's just important to use it and understand what the risks and benefits are, so that you don't find yourself in a situation where maybe you should have objected to the admission of a document, but that may have been produced by AI or manipulated somehow. I think you've got to stay on top of these things by using them, so that if there are risks that you confront down the line, you can either avoid them or bring them to light. So I think sometimes lawyers also think that they want to wait until something is definitely definite or certain, or see if more people are using it before they decide to use it. I would say that's not a good idea here. This thing is changing so fast and the train's already out of the gate. So just, as imperfect as it is, get on board and use it for something, just to get comfortable with it and know that it's changing.
Absolutely. And that actually kind of really leads into kind of the first question. I hope we can get to a few of these today, but it's overall kind of those support and resources, getting started. Where do you get started? What are some of those support, either articles you recommend, people you recommend, resources? There was even a question asking, do you feel that lawyers should be trained on that prompt engineering to take full advantage of AI? Really getting started. What are those resources or support areas? If anybody wants to have suggestions or thoughts.
So I'm more of a jump in and just play around with it kind of thing. I feel like there's a lot of good work that people have done on prompt engineering, but my own view on prompts is that if it's going to take me 20 minutes to prompt this thing, I'm just going to write it myself. So I think there's a fine line between just putting in a couple of words like draft a brief about civil rights and coming up with some 45-page or 45-minute iteration to get some sort of result. So I think when you start playing around with it, it's like taking a deposition. You can read books on taking a deposition, but until you're in the room figuring out like what your rhythm is, how you're going to follow up with a particular witness, you don't really understand it. So I think experimentation rather than resources. And I think, you see all these resources now, like 100 prompts for your business, or, read, and they're just, they're not necessarily that useful. So I think the experimentation mode is best. And I'm sure there are some valuable resources out there, and there's some people, Josh Kubicki has a newsletter on, it's called Brainiacs, and he does it like, he's got like 100 of them where every day there was like a new tip or a new approach. I mean, and those are pretty quick and pretty interesting to implement. I think that's one of the better resources I can think of. But otherwise, my advice would be like, don't overdo the focus on the prompt. You'll kind of figure it out, especially if you are an attorney, because you're used to this iterative process of responding to questions from judges, asking questions in depositions, or asking your clients follow-up questions to get the full story.
Absolutely. And I think there were a couple of just even comments on the types of AI that people are utilizing. And Robert even specifically asked, can anybody comment on Harvey AI? Or if not Harvey, if there is one that you prefer to use over the other. I believe Harvey's still on its wait list.
I think it's still like in beta. I think it's still in the wait list. And that's the one that's legal specific, right? That was initiated by like, I think Alan and Overy, like there was a bunch of them, I think, involved with that, but I think it's still on the wait list.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. While I'm not an expert in prompts at all, I tend to agree with Carolyn. I do think one of the big things with the prompts is to say, tell it what point of view to assume. So if you're asking something about your yard, don't say, ask the question about the yard and get the grade school answer. Say, assume you're a landscape architect and then answer this question. Those types of things are really valuable.
I agree. And I've even done it kind of the other way where it's talk to me like I'm a teenager, explain this concept to me like, as a third grader. And it's amazing how it can really kind of break down those content for you. So I just kind of wanted to share my screen here real quick. So that way everybody has access to these QR codes. Again, a big shout out to Marie Burgess, to Jim Calloway, to Carolyn Elephant for sure. I know they have a crazy busy schedule. So to kind of take an hour and join us and talk about their insights and experiences, I definitely appreciate it. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their Thursday.